Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is normally the time that Rhonda and I would do our family prayer time with SEC. And so we want to thank you again for being on here. But tonight we have a very, very special treat for you. We have a licensed professional counselor here in Miss Tiffany Starnes. And she is going to be answering questions that many of you have written in and given us to ask her about this COVID-19 pandemic, the impact that it's having on our children, on our relationships, and our mental health. So we're going to ask her some questions tonight, and so we're so glad that you're here. So stay tuned, everybody. Well, Tiffany, it is just absolutely wonderful to have you here with me tonight to answer these questions, and so we're just honored that you're here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Well, let's just go and get started. And so I want to go ahead and just get started with a heavy question right off the bat. And so the first one is this, Tiffany, is how do you keep it together when you're losing your job or your business?
That is a big question because it covers a lot of aspects. It covers loss of stability, it covers loss in general, and being able to keep mentally it together in the process. And so, first off, is that when anything attacks our security and our stability of life, there's always going to be feelings that arise from that because of the attack on our finances, attack on our way of life, our way of being, and also the stress that comes along with being absent from an area that exercises our gift, skills, and talents. And so when we don't have that outlet to be able to do that, and wondering where we're going to go from there, that begins to be a very stressful situation. Then with loss, when you come into loss, you always are dealing with grief. And grief is a big factor. And we're surrounded by it right now. So beyond our own grief, we also have the grief of the world around us. So we're dealing with things on a pandemic level, worldwide, and then we're also dealing with things on an epidemic level, which is face-to-face in each of us, from one person to the next. And as we're dealing with these things on multiple facets of life, it is hard to hold it together. And so when you're dealing with loss and you're working through that, one of the better ways to deal with that is actually see that as a grieving process, like when you had a loss, like a death. Or a loss of a faculty, is to realize we work through the same grieving acceptance process when we do that. And I simplify it. There's been expanded out to 5 steps, but I kind of keep it simple with just the 4. And the 4 steps is denial, which sometimes is just the shock of it all. We'll often pull back in denial just to cope with all the stress that it goes along with. And then we'll move into sadness, which doesn't always look like sadness, isn't always just that I'm sad. It also is that I'm easily agitated, easily aggravated, walking through water, like a heavy walking through water sensation type thing. And then we'll move into anger. And anger can be, who do I blame? Do I blame God? Do I blame my boss? Do I blame the economy? Do I blame the devil? Do I blame God? Who do I blame in this whole process? I'm just angry about it all. And you can rotate between these 3 steps and these 3 things hour by hour, minute by minute. So I may be laughing one minute, crying the next day, screaming at somebody the next minute, because I'm working through this acceptance process. So you may not be necessarily losing it, but you're actually working the grieving process, and there's no perfect way to actually grieve. So I think part of it is really realizing that I'm not losing my mind. I may be losing my expectation of what's going on, and I'm being attacked on my security. So really looking at what are my stabilizers, what are other things to kind of help me get stable and secure in these areas where my finances or my way of life is being threatened, and as well as really realizing that I'm not losing it, I'm working the process, and I'll pull back into that healthy denial to be able to keep functioning.
Tiffany, let me ask you a question on this vein. I know you're a very seasoned counselor, and but like when it comes to blame, blaming that, maybe you lost your job. You think, well, if I would have, have not taken this job, or I would have, done better, I would have had another position. And would you agree that blaming yourself is that like a number one reason for depression or cause of depression?
I think it comes into a couple of elements. One is actual regret and how we deal with regret when we make choices, because we do feel like we make choices about our life and that we drive the boat. And I think sometimes we've got to look at all the variables that go into the decisions we make, because every decision I make makes another decision, and it ripples through.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a complete ripple effect. That I'm only the instigator of that, but I am not the one that gets to control the world. And I think that's a lot of what's going on right now is so
Mm-hmm.
many people, we have this false feeling that we control everything.
Right.
And so being able to realize that I can't control everything, and when I start ifing, which is a big no-no, is the
Mm-hmm.
most, I call it the most powerful two-letter word out there, is I start giving myself this sensation as if
Mm-hmm.
I could control something. I can read the future, or I can control the past, and that's just not reality. I have no crystal ball. I cannot read the future. If I did, I would have made a different choice. And as soon as I experience something, hindsight's 2020,
Right.
and I can look over my shoulder and say, "Oh, if I'd done this or I'd done this differently, then things would be different today." That's not how it happened. And if you had made that choice, another choice would have been made. So it can be really heavy to deal with regret if you feel that you had total and complete choice and that you were in charge of all the ripple effects that happen after that as well.
Right.
So yes, it can be a very heavy depressing factor if you do try to own all that.
Right. Yeah, I know there's been times in my life to where we've had loss, and whatever. It could have been financial loss, or family situation where I felt like there was loss. But I found that there's times in my life when I began to blame myself for all the losses. And I think that was a time that I've never had experienced depression before until I began to take all the blame for all the loss, blaming myself for all the loss. And I know that put me in a dark hole. And right now, with what's going on, with a job loss, or maybe even distance in a relationship now, I think that we all have to be careful and say we didn't cause this. This is something that didn't just happen to us. It's something that's happened to everyone, and we're just caught up in it. So, well, let me move on to another question. So here we go. Number two, the question is this: how do you maintain a marriage relationship with a person that keeps score? I think Rhonda might have sent this one in. I'm not sure.
That's a pretty good question. That's a pretty wide open question as well. I assume they're meaning keeping score, that meaning that I'm at work and you're furloughed, or I'm right, you're wrong. And I think what is the biggest barrier in this is really a breakdown in communication, and a willingness to look through the world through another person's lens, and through their eyes, to kind of say, well, I know I'm experiencing this. And we develop and we judge the world by how we view things.
Right.
And we come to certain conclusions and expectations of this is the way it is. And so we judge the world through our perspective. So that ends up being that I'm right, you're wrong. And so if you think differently than me, you're thinking wrongly. And I think that competitiveness can become a part. But I think a lot of times, many times in my experience, that it appears competitively, but it's usually a bad communication way of asking for a compliment, asking for praise. That so many people will say, well, I do this and you never do that, or
Yep.
look what I did. And it's just a really bad way of saying, hey, notice me. Hey, can you see I'm doing well?
Right.
So I think one of the best ways, there's two main recommendations I would say with this is, one is praise your partner for
Yep.
what they're doing right in whatever area they're saying, well, you're not this, or look what I'm doing, is to kind of say, to say, yes, I notice what you're doing. I see that you're doing that. You're not invisible. I notice that. You don't say you're not invisible, but to be able to say, I see what you're doing and we appreciate that.
Right.
You are good at that, period.
That's a
Don't
great.
counter back with that.
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining that, because, again, I didn't know anything about love languages for a long time. I had no idea. And I was bad about that, keeping score in our relationship with Rhonda and I, because I felt like, if I did all these things, she would notice and she would praise me. And of course, she didn't know anything about love languages either, and so we've had to mature at that. So what do maybe this time is a good time to discover that, like, and to be transparent with your spouse and say, this is what I need from you. What do you think about that?
I think definitely, and I think that comes into my second point, and that is modeling what you need. Modeling what you need. Usually, how we show love is by the way we receive it. And as much as I'm not a supporter of making assumptions in marriage, that use in any type of relationship, that tends to take us to a line of mistakes usually. But if we're going to assume something, is that if they write you cards, they probably would like a card. If they send you notes, if they pet you or hold you, they probably want a hug if they're affectionate in that way, or they do little acts of services or stop by and bring you a candy bar on the way home. They'd probably like for you to stop by and bring a little trinket home to them every once in a while. So I think, modeling what it is that you want until or if your partner ever changes, I think is the best way to improve your relationship, because if you're half the relationship and you get better, then the relationship gets better.
Yeah, I used to use this. When you're married to a pastor, we use the biblical lines on you all the time. The Bible, and I would say to Rhonda sometimes, "Well, do unto others you haven't do unto you. This is what I'd have you do unto me," and by hugging her or whatever, and it just wasn't her love language. So I had a hard time understanding that I felt like that she was that I was loving her in the way that she needed, because I was giving her what I wanted, and then she felt like she was loving me. She'd say, well, I do the laundry, and I and I help you out with whatever you like to be helped out with. I'm like, listen, I don't care if the house never gets cleaned again, just hold my hand,
That's
or
right.
hug me or touch me or something like that. And so we've had to work that out. But would you agree, Tiffany, that with a person that's struggling with that, like your spouse is not a mind reader, and your children are not mind readers, and so don't you think it would just be better if we just said, hey, listen, this is what I like, this is how I feel loved. And even in time, especially now when we're such tight quarters with each other, I mean, like, we're on top of each other, and we need to know, what is it, what's getting on your nerves too, when you do this, this aggravates me. What do you think about that?
I'd like to introduce you, and Rhonda will appreciate this, is that introduce you that the golden rule is a good starting place, but it's not the end of it. Walking a mile in someone else's shoe or treating someone the way you want to be treated is a good place to start. But what if your person, more often than not, we marry people that are totally different than us. And
Absolutely.
then our kids pop out and they're all totally different from each other. It's amazing how that happens. So I'd like to introduce you to the platinum rule. The platinum rule is do unto others as they want to be done unto.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes actually not just knowing about women, knowing about men, knowing about children, but actually knowing your man, knowing your woman, knowing your child, and beginning to really say, kind of stand and look at the world through their lens and kind of say, and figuring out what it is that they need. So when you're on top of each other, the frustration is going to be up. I mean, all the research kind of says, that there's going to be more conflict. The more closely we're in there, the more walls there are, the more distance there are, the more less walls there are. We're closer, but there's more conflict. And
Right.
so those things are going to happen. We're going to have those conflict. But I think figuring out what is frustrating you right now, because children, they don't express depression the same way. And I'm sure we'll get to family issues, but they don't express depression. Oftentimes looks like acting out, it looks out of control, and so looking at how we treat each other and kind of what's going on with them. So communication is good, what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
but I think also just modeling also what it is you're wanting, and kind of almost see it like a game to figure out the puzzle behind what makes them tick, and what is it, why they do what they do, and what is it that they want for
Right.
Valentine's Day. What is it that they want to make this day feel better? What is it that they do better? Just like you're saying, affection helps you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And coming up behind her and saying, lifting her hands out of the dishwasher and saying, hey, don't worry your pretty little hands over this, go sit down, I got this. And I'm going to tell you, she's going to fall in love with you all over again with
Oh.
those type of actions.
Oh yeah. Well, her love tank stays full because hers is quality time, and that's what we do. I mean, it's like that's it, and she does very good with me as well. We've learned those things, and it's helped us. So I guess as we're moving on, to this next question, I guess I would, what I was going to say, I just thought about it was, people again shouldn't use the Bible like I did in the beginning as a manipulation. And please don't use what Pastor Jeff says as a manipulation. Some people quote me more. They say, well, we go home on Sunday and I tell her what you said when I'm trying, or what, I tell her what you said, or I tell him what you
They
said.
do the same thing to
Yeah,
me.
yeah, and they're trying to, I'm like, please don't do it. No wonder your children hate me. They don't really hate me, but they're like, oh, there comes a pastor, or your spouse. So let's move on, Tiffany. The third question I have here is how do you stay motivated when isolated?
Those are two big motivators and things that come into life is that, isolation really speaks to aloneness. And just because we're alone doesn't necessarily mean we have to be in isolation. So thinking about those things that typically motivate you, beginning to adapt them to the close quarters, getting creative, those things that you enjoy, things that allow you some level of connection. I think one thing that when I think about aloneness and isolation that we've got to understand about people is that, there's all different types of personalities where some people enjoy a great deal of solitude, but still science says that our brains are wired for connection. So even if you're a kind of a loner personality, you enjoy a solitude lifestyle, eventually you get to a point where, dang, I like connection, but I kind of like to connect with people watching the TV or passing them in Walmart or passing them on the streets or having colleagues around me in other offices. I don't necessarily need to socialize or have all that. And so that would be more of the introverted personality. And the introverted personality, the way I kind of explain it is it's where you go to get your batteries charged. So if you go and get your battery charged, an introverted person will go home to get their batteries charged and go out and socializing will drain their batteries. Where an extroverted person, they get out around people to charge their batteries and then go home to rest so they can go home so they can go back out and charge their batteries again.
Yep.
And so both of these type of personalities and lots of different personalities in between are trapped at home right now and trying to get their batteries charged in some form or fashion. They can't get enough solitude or they can't get enough socializing. And each person needs a little bit different. So I think it comes into, looking at the full spectrum of together time all the way down to isolation, and solitude's right before that. And I think, speaking to those things and trying to figure out exactly where we need to be in that place. So those things that would typically motivate you, and sometimes because of this abnormal situation that we're in right now, what typically works for us is not working. So we do have to adapt it, and we do have to figure out how it fits into the people that are around us. So working at those type of things to feel motivated, to keep being motivated, and to know too, we're pleasure-seeking beings. And this is not pleasurable. This is uncomfortable.
Right.
We as Americans, we like independence. We like freedom.
Right.
And we're used to being able to exercise those as
Right.
much as often as we want to, within the few confines we have above us and the authority above us. And so for somebody or something to come in and say, you can't, you're not going to feel motivated to do unpleasurable things. And so I think we have to be realistic too about, I may not feel motivated to do chores.
Right.
Because I want to have pleasure. So I might be seeking more comfort food. I might be doing more things that pleasure me, and I might not be very motivated in the uncomfortable things because I'm already overall uncomfortable.
Right.
And so I'm going to seek the more pleasurable thing, which is chilling or those things that
Or binge watching on Netflix.
exactly, because that's more pleasurable than cleaning up the house or cleaning out a closet or different things like that.
Would you think, Tiffany, that or agree that maybe setting some kind of routine, making myself go through a routine even though I'm at home, like, when I get up in the morning, I'm going to, go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and get up and brush my teeth and wash my face and get dressed, even though I don't have anywhere to go, and maybe, I'm going to have breakfast and I'm going to work with the kids at this certain time, and maybe try to come up with some kind of routine?
We are creatures of routine. Again, just like we're wired for connection, we are also wired for routine. We do like routine. We crave routine. We want to know what to expect. We are continually, as human beings, we are continually fighting between a balance between expectation and routine and knowing what to expect and spontaneity.
Mm-hmm.
And if we get too far in either direction, if we get too much out of a routine, we will be uncomfortable and dissatisfied in life. And if life gets too predictable, then we become bored and we
Mm-hmm.
become discontent. So we are striving always in all circumstances for a balance in between those two. Depression, definitely for fighting depression and being around the house, it definitely helps that get that heaviness of the whole situations off us if we get up, get dressed, wash our face, and get into that routine. And one of the ways I kind of encourage this to, again, coming back to your last question too, to be motivated is kind of looking at the day, just depending on where your mind is. Do I need to look at my week, my day, or AM, PM, evening?
Mm-hmm.
And begin to break down the things between I want to get done, I need to get done, and what has to get done.
Right.
The has tos will always supersede
Mm-hmm.
the want tos and the need tos.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure exactly while we're striving for some pleasure in this day to get up and get into some sort of routine. And just as an aside, is that no matter what the commercials say, this is not a new normal yet. We're not there.
Right.
This is not normal. This is very abnormal.
Right.
So there's no need to, we need to rebuke that and really say, this is not normal. This is abnormal. So when we get to the other side of this, which we will, because this is a storm and no storm lasts forever. We'll
Right.
get to the other side. Then we'll begin to set up new normals. But we are not in a normal yet. So a temporary routine, because of the temporary situation we're in, and working into the have tos, but working in the things I want to get done and I need to get done, and make sure they're salt and peppered throughout my day, throughout my week, and throughout the period of time that I'm here. But also to make sure to do those mid-air corrections. That as I get distracted or diverted from multiple people in the house or the have tos that pop up, that I make sure that I make that want to a priority so I can introduce pleasure into this very uncomfortable situation.
Right. Yes. Yes. That's good. Let me ask you another question. So, how can we help our children cope with COVID during this unprecedented time? How do we help our children mentally with this pandemic, and when they're hearing about it, and listen, the smallest of children know something's not right now because they're not going to school, and they just don't understand what's going on. So how do we help them cope with it?
The majority of kids aren't that upset that they're not in school. They're upset that their routine and what they know to expect, because we rely on expectations to be satisfied and okay, to know we're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so if what we expected to happen did not happen, we'll all get kind of disturbed at some level. But helping our kids to cope, children are very resilient. Overall, they're very resilient. And as we get through this, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about this, but as we get through it, we'll know a little bit more of what to do and the resilience that are in children. But while we're in it right now one is to really, for yourself, you're the stabilizer for your home.
Mm-hmm.
You're your children's stabilizers.
Right.
So to really focus on your own self-care and make sure you're okay. Knowledge is power. Making sure that you're not feeding into everything you hear, and that you really know the truths, and to really seek those truths as much as they can be obtained in a first-time
Right.
experience. And to be able to introduce it to your children on a level that they understand as they ask about it. And to be able to do that to help them to cope through that. And there's lots of resources online. I sent one to Chesney for younger kids, for preschool and early education, and she can get you that link. And to be able to kind of just explain what's going on, and to help them to be able to maneuver the fears. And so when the fears come up, is how can you come in and bring that back to them? It's just like going through a storm. And
Right.
it's kind of funny. You stole my material yesterday
Right. Yes.
by talking about the storm.
Uh-huh.
But if your kid looks at you and says in the middle of a tornado, "Mommy, are we going to die?"
Right.
Well, you don't go, "Oh, I don't know, maybe."
Yeah. Right.
Let's hope you don't say that to your child.
Right.
Some of us might, but we need to double back if that happens to come out. We need to double back and say, "I'm not sure what's going to happen, but we're together in this, and we're going to be okay. And this is what's going on, and this is my understanding." And how does that make you feel? And
Mm-hmm.
how are you? What's your worries?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we begin to address it?
Tiffany, I used to tell parents uh, when they when they go through a divorce, immediately parents want to get their children help. They're like, hey, I need a good counselor to send my children to. That's the number one thing that I hear. And what I've found is this is through the years is that if the parent will take care of themselves and get healthy, then their children will automatically become healthy. And the majority of the times is that, if especially if they're small, if the parents will be okay, their children will be okay. And so, do you find in this time that we're in, if children, you don't have to. Children can read their parents. They know what's going on. They feel it. And so when a parent is consumed with worry and anxiety, does that bleed over to the children?
Most definitely, because just like I said a while ago, there's a ripple effect, and so they're looking to you to see, am I okay? Are we okay? And no matter what you're looking, they're just like you say, there's more caught than taught,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're going to catch it and they're going to pick up on there. Their kids are very smart and they're very sensitive and very sensing, and they can really pick up on the anxieties and the fears and things like that. Now, understanding it's not so much that you have them,
Mm-hmm.
because we all are a little frustrated
Oh,
and
yes.
fearful. It's not that you have them, it's that when they ask you, are you afraid? Then be honest with them. Yeah, I'm a little concerned right now, but this is what we're doing to address the fears, and we're going to get through this, and we're going to be okay, or this is what we're going to do. And one thing I do want to mention too is that there are exceptional kids.
Mm-hmm.
There are exceptional kids that before this pandemic came out, or before these fears came through, that there are exceptional kids that are already afraid of germs. They're already
Right.
afraid of dying.
Right.
They're already high anxiety. Um, but they do pick up on how we're dealing with things, and I agree with you as we deal with a divorce situation, is that some kids need assistance immediately because of the dealing with the adjustments in the home,
Right.
and some people need help through the adjustment. But in the long run, they do better if the parents are looking healthy, because they ultimately, most kids just want you healthy and happy, just like we want them
Right.
healthy and happy.
So let's just say this, okay, I'm a parent and say, I'm concerned about this and maybe a little more anxious than I probably should be. Let's say that's me. And then I've got a child that I want to be strong for. How can I'm trying to hide that maybe. So what do I do? How do I pretend around my child? What do I do?
I think I think we know how to do this. We know how to put on a good righteous front when we stand in front of the pastor. We know how to put on a good loyal, and we know how to put on a good face when we're standing in front of our employer and boss, and how to behave in public. We know how to do that. But the reason why we can't do that is usually because we're so overwhelmed and we're so out of sorts that we can't put on that strong front. And so I think what it comes into is a lot of self care. We have to come back and we have to address our own fears. Like I said, knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're feeling out of control, our mouth will get out of control, our actions will get out of control, our, our words and mouth will get out of control, and these things will happen. And so we have to kind of work at being able to get ourselves to a low threshold of stress, that when they come and ask these questions, or prepare a little bit for how to respond to these questions when they come. But keeping that threshold of stress down as much as possible, and really not getting knowledgeable about what's truly going on and seeking those answers for them. And it's okay to say, I really don't know right now, but we will.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was little and I would be upset, or cry in front of my son or my children, and he'd come in and say, "Are you okay, Mommy?" I'm like, "Not right now, but I will be.
Mm-hmm.
I will be okay." And a good hug from you would help right now.
Mm-hmm.
And he would come and give me a hug, and I said, "Okay, I'll be out there in 10 minutes." And he would scamper off
Right.
and run off, and he took that answer and he was fine. And then I was like, "Okay, Tiffany, you got 10 minutes to get it together."
Right.
And somehow I'd figure out how to do that and press forward. But I think what it comes down to is also to realistically know your limitations
Right.
and be able to seek support when you have it. And there's way too many ways for us to get connected and stay connected in this technological world to try to do this all on your own.
Right.
God never expected us to do this all on our own.
Exactly. And of course, with that is constantly feeding yourself the things that frighten you. It's like watching the news continually over and over again. The news cycle is like a person that is horrified of horror movies. They go see a horror movie and they stay awake for the next 3 nights because of seeing the horror movie. But yet again, the next Friday they go back and see another horror movie. And that's sort of the way that it is with the media right now, is that the media thrives on fear, and it causes ratings and all of that. So we have to be the one to choose how much of that we absorb, and we allow in ourselves, and including myself. I mean, if I consume myself with news, I get anxious. I mean, my blood pressure goes up. The greatest thing I ever did for my blood pressure was turn off all the talk radio and turn off the news media to just having little bits of it.
So let me be clear about this. When I say knowledge is power, it can get out of sorts. Anything can get out of balance. Anything out of balance usually creates instability. So the knowledge I'm talking about is 98% of people that get this survive. Knowing what we're looking at, what is the next date that we're looking at for possibly lifting the shelter, lifting this, what is going on with the schools, what is their plans, what are the expectation that these teachers have on these children, and bringing that information back to them.
Right.
But you're very, very much correct with the newscasters. I lovingly call them bluescasters or fearcasters.
Right.
And that's pretty much what's driving it, and that's here as well. So we already have enough, and all they're doing, and they're feeding more and more of that. So you need to take some information, but you definitely take in the information, but you need to put a limit on how much you're taking in, because whatever you take in, you've got to take back off. And so that negativity you've got to counter, you've got to get that back off of you, which is more work, right?
Right.
And then you've got to counter it with some positivity that you took that negativity in. So whatever you're
Right.
doing, in that you've got to equally balance something that lessens your stress and de-stresses you as much as you're choosing to expose yourself to stress. So definitely limiting how much we're watching the news and how long we're looking at that, because it's not the good news. It is blues casting and fear casting.
Yes, I agree with that, and I definitely think that when you have, like you said, you have to balance that. And I'll make this comment, and we'll move to the next question. But for me, that's why God's word is so important to me. In the morning, I get it, my dose of that the first thing in the morning, and then reminding myself throughout the day to think about God, and I have to have those reminders. Everybody say, well, you're a pastor, you should know that. Well, no, I do know that, like everybody else knows it, but I have to practice that. So well, let me ask you another question. It's a little lengthy. It's actually 2 parts. How can I stop from becoming frustrated with my children during this time? I am used to being away at work for a few hours, and since I'm laid off due to COVID, it can be hard not having any time to myself.
I see 3 parts of that. One is the time to myself, the frustration factor, and how do I help my kids in their frustration. And so first off is really looking at, again, my limitations, the limitations that I have for myself. I've got to know myself and really know how much I can really handle this. This is the first time we've gone through this type of situation, a house arrest, or where we're government imposed house arrest. We haven't had to deal with that before. And so anytime we do something the first time, just understanding that we've got to give ourselves a break, that anytime we do something the first time, we're not going to do it beautifully. and to kind of balance what is going on within ourself and our frustration factors. And having that routine to go out, when I go out and I exercise my gift, skills, and talents on my job, then I kind of get filled back up. I get built up because I
Right.
got to, exercise what I'm good at. And sometimes we don't necessarily feel really good sometimes in our parenting or in our home life because it's kind of a never ending, thankless job. So we struggle sometimes in that. And so they get frustrated and we get frustrated back because, what's dished out kind of comes back. That's kind of what we do. We react to their frustrations.
Right.
And then we don't take the time and we don't balance again the self-aware with the self-care. And we have to kind of strike that balance is to be able to find that. So finding that time, making that time, not finding it, because you're never going to find
Right.
it.
That's right. Yes.
You've got to make that time. You've got to make that place. Find that place in your home or make it that is my alone time. Even if it is, we're taking an hour of quiet time. You can do whatever you want to do. You can read a book. You can take a nap. You can do whatever you do. But we're going to have an hour of quiet time because I need that. Or finding that porch or finding that place that I can go and bring some solitude to myself for a moment. I remember one of the a story I heard years ago was about a lady that was a mother of like 13 children, and she always had her apron on. And so you can imagine with a mother of 13 children, she never had a break. So she would get her apron and throw it over her head. And she would just sit there and have her apron thrown over her head, and everybody knew not to mess with mom when she had her apron over her head.
Wow.
So, that's when she prayed, that's when she thought, that's when she took her breaths, that's when she did all the things she needed to do to lower her frustration factor, and so she could have the strength to pull that apron back off her head and keep going. And so so I think finding that time, but also kind of knowing that you're not a pioneer in this either. There are educators that have been dealing with your children day in and day out and year after year after year. There are homeschool moms and homeschool parents that have been, and grandparents that have been homeschooling and doing this for years. Use those resources, find your tricks and tools of the trade to be able to do it easily. Don't try to invent the wheel. They've been there, they've done it, they've already made the mistakes, they've already frustrated themselves and pulled their hair out. There's no need for you to do that for yourself. Seek those people in wise counsel that are people that are already doing that, and take breaks. And it's okay to call time out from your kids.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That's great. I want to move on to another question. Our time is passing. The next question I have is what are some ways to help children with anxiety over schoolwork? How do you handle their frustration while you are just as frustrated?
Praise God, we only have 2 weeks left, to be able to say that. I think definitely. And I think, again, this comes into to knowledge and what is it that you're not a teacher and you are filling in. These teachers help you do your job, but they're the teachers. And so coming in and just doing the best you can do, get them to making sure the pressure that you're being put on that is realistic, making sure the pressure that you're putting on your children is truly what's needed. Check with the teachers, check with the leaders. A lot of the leaderships right now are not requiring, they're doing pass fail, they're not requiring full assignments to be turned in, different things like that. So just kind of making sure that you're putting the right amount of pressure on your child as well. And then kind of coming in and again being willing to take some breaks and step away when we are both getting frustrated and with their work and just again, knowledge is power, and knowing that especially in this county, they've already said the beginning of the school year they're going to circle back and cover all this material in the final semester, and to be able to bring them back to where they need to be. So, to understand we're maintaining and we're trying, but we're not their teacher, and just doing the best we can. And that's all God expects from us. And I think that's all we need to expect from ourselves as well.
That's good. That's good. That's a very, very good answer. I know that I guess that's the number one thing I've heard parents say is that they've said, I didn't sign up for this. And all of a sudden, they didn't want to become a homeschool teacher. That's not part of their plan. They didn't offer that, but all of a sudden, everybody's had to become that. Let me ask you another question. This was interesting to me when I read this question. I've heard we can expect some people to come through this pandemic event with PTSD. What are the signs to watch out for to determine if you or someone you know is suffering from PTSD and need to seek help? So really it's two questions. First one is that do you think people are going to come through this with PTSD?
We think of PTSD, we think of war, we think of witnessing something extreme like a car accident or a murder, and we really think of the average person thinks of PTSD that way. But trauma can the true definition of trauma can be the result of any action that contradicted what we expected. There's that word again, expectation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if anything happens that contradicts what we expected was going to happen, it can be traumatic. And that explains why it's traumatic for one person and not the other person, because we have different expectations as we approach and we endure certain situations. So will there be some people that'll come through with post-trauma stress? Definitely. There will be some people. And how you would kind of know this is that everyone's a little stressed right now because there's so many unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
As there becomes more and more knowns, we will fall back into routines. We will fall back into things that, because we know what to expect. And good or bad, if we know what to expect, we're going to cope better.
Right.
Okay. Once everything has kind of settled back into a routine, and it's been that way consistently over a period of time, do you understand there is a thing called acute anxiety, and acute anxiety can last from about 2 weeks to a month.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just after everything settles and the dust begins to settle that we have that. Like, for example, a person has a car accident and then they're afraid to drive for a period of time, but eventually they do get back behind the wheel. It may take a little bit of time to get over it,
Right.
but it usually only lasts a couple of weeks or a month, and they'll still adjust and do things differently for a period of time. But that will be that after after a month, then it actually can qualify for PTSD or post-traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you'll see things like hypersensitivity to light or sound. They're jumpy, they're nervous, they're highly anxious. They can easily, be real jumpy and edgy. They can have bad nightmares and disturbances in sleep and affect and many other type of symptoms like that. But if these things are happening where we're kind of reliving the incident and we can't seem to get beyond that point, and it's interfering with us physiologically, that our minds and our bodies aren't working right, then that would be when they need to seek counsel and find a professional.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And I like that word acute anxiety because I think a lot of us have experienced that. And again, that might be the case now, but the good thing is like you said, in a month or so, this is going to pass. This is going to pass. We're going to get back to routines. We don't know, they may change a little bit from what we do now, and the way we do things may change a little bit. And it may look a little different, but we will find a new normal. We're not there yet. We're not in a new normal, but we're going to find a new normal. And so I think that's great. Well, I have another question here. What are some ways for adults to de-stress and stay positive as we cope with the isolated measures?
So again, isolation is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Isolation and being on quarantine may not be a choice, or being in this government mandation is not a choice, but isolation is a choice. And because we're wired for connection, it is important that we pursue connection.
Mm-hmm.
And when the stress kind of comes on me, which means I'm feeling pressure in my body. I'm feeling that my normal functioning is being compromised. My patience is thinner, and I'm getting more irritated a little bit more quickly and things like that. Or I've got less activity, and so I'm having built up physical tension in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And so things that kind of relieve that, and addressing all three levels of ourself, our mind, body, and our spirit, or our soul, body, and spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure we look at activities to address each of those three, our own trinity inside ourselves, to address each of those three aspects. What can I do for my mind to distress? That could be, anything from puzzles to, like you said, healthy escapisms into Netflix and things like that. Something that's just a little more peaceful, a little more pleasurable. Things to kind of keep my mind busy and occupied, and things that challenge my brain, where it's not being challenged with Netflix and and bonbons. And so, and then the body, exercise, of course, physical activity. So they are loosening stuff where we can go on some trails, and we can do it if we do it, distancing or
Right.
walking around the neighborhood. A lot of people are saying, hey, I see neighbors I haven't seen in a long time. They're actually out and walking around and playing
Right.
with their kids, and like, this is fantastic. So getting some physical, and that helps a lot with the kids, getting that physical tension off of them, because a
Right.
lot of the annoying things they do is just because they got pent up energy, either due to anxiety or just the lack of physical activity. So get them moving. And so addressing the body, calming it through meditation and prayer, other things that kind of keep the body calm, and all the different exercises type things that can be done. And then the spirit, like you said, seeking me first, seeking God first, and then seeking other things along the way. And then if you need to do some mid-air corrections, middle day, half day, is keep reminding yourself of what your truths are. Keep reminding yourself of what that this is a storm. This too shall pass. This
Right.
isn't a normal. And I think, addressing those things to de-stress, those things that are building that pressure, and kind of doing those quick little pressure relievers all throughout the day, and making and trying your best not to let it depressurize on other people.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Another question is does the time period or length of the pandemic play a part in impacting our ability to snap back to our familiar routine? Let me read again. Does the time period or length of the pandemic play a part in impacting our ability to snap back to our familiar routine?
I think this can be individualized, but there will be people that will have difficulty transitioning back to or beyond this fear that that we're going to be okay and we're not going to die. There's going to be certain people that are going to struggle with the rebounding from this. But the average person, because again we are creatures of routine, it doesn't take long.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm used to, even right now in this, I'm used to being out the door, being up and going by at 6:30, and now I'm struggling at 8.
Mm-hmm.
Just in 1 month, I've set
Right.
a new habit of relating to my sleep that I don't know what in the world I'm going to do to have to get back up at 6:30 again, but I'll
Right.
do it.
Right.
And for a couple of weeks I'll drag, but then it'll become my normal again. So because we are creatures of routine, typically we're not going to deal uh, with long-term things depending on how short or long it is, because we're wired to adapt, and we're wired to get back into routines. And so yes, it'll be a struggle as we're getting establishing, but once we adapt and once we get into that new routine, it's usually pretty easy for most human.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. Uh, and then having something to look forward to again as well, like work or school, and,
Definitely,
and
since
I
we're
never thought I'd hear so many students say how much they miss school. Even those that were like, I don't know how to hate school, and now I'm hearing them say, oh, I miss school so much. So it doesn't take long to do that. So, well, the last question I have here, it says this: how to stay close to God when your spouse is on a different path that causes disruption in the marriage. How to stay close to God when your spouse is on a different path that causes disruption in the marriage.
Well, we could speak another hour about this one,
I know.
because this is at the root of a majority of marital disconnect, is because there's a break in the partnering. And this is why God kind of tells us on the upfront, he gives us the advice to seek someone who's equally yoked and on the same pathway, and heading at least the same pathway. It doesn't mean that we have to believe exactly the same way or exercise our faith the same way, but we're both at the end of the day seeking the same pathway, and that's the challenge that comes into it. And that's why he gives us that advice. But when people evolve or change, or when they, that's not something that we really visited much before we get married, it's going to be a struggle in the partnership and in that connection and that connectability.
Mm-hmm.
However, my advice still stands with an earlier question, and that kind of comes down to is that what tends to happen in these situations is that it brings me to a complaining, demanding place to that you need to do this, or you need to do it the right way, and you need to go to church, and you need to quit going fishing, and you need to quit watching those football games, and you need to be at church with the rest of your family, and we start picking and complaining, and really and truly the reality is that the only way we're going to win anybody to Christ is to show them Christ,
Right.
and to really, if there's any chance that it's not really our job, it's Holy Spirit's job to convict them,
Right.
It's the enemy's job to condemn them, and it's our job to support and encourage them towards the path we want them, and in every situation. And so as we sit down is to kind of model that righteousness and make them crave what we have, and
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do that. There's no guarantees because they have their God-given free will to be however they want to be.
Right.
And so it will create disconnect in the relationship. So if you can't make any movement in that way, the best thing is where is our level of connection?
Mm-hmm.
Where does that exist
Right.
for us so that we can nurture togetherness?
Yeah, and that as long as that disruption is not something that's immoral or illegal, that's a when it's something that's immoral or illegal, that's a whole nother story. But it's when something that's we just don't like that they're doing. That
Pathway is the key word she said. The path, or
yeah.
this person said, is the pathway.
Mm-hmm.
If we're just on two different paths, that means those paths can intersect at any point in time, and there may be another crossroad. So don't think you're at the end of your journey, because there could be a crossway up the road. And if they like what they see when they get to the crossroads, or they have their moment, or God is working on them in their heart and brain, and sometimes you don't know that. People don't show what's going on in their head or heart. They don't understand it, so they don't talk about
Right.
it. So don't ever underestimate what God's doing on the inside, because it's the condition of their heart that really begins to create change.
Yeah. I know that, and of course, the one thing that I've had to learn through the years, and we'll close, Tiffany, is that I've had to learn that my job is not to change people. And I really thought that when when I got married, I thought, hey, I'm gonna help Rhonda be better,
Me too.
and then I thought that with my children, hey, make them better, and even as a pastor with people, I really thought that my job is to change them, help them get better, because I've seen so much potential. But I've had to realize that that's a mistake. You can't change anybody. You can be there to support people, encourage people, and show the way. I said my job is to know the way, go the way, and show the way. That's it. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot that I can do.
They have a Savior, and you're not it. And I think we just have to remember that with our kids and our family, to kind of say they have a Savior, and I'm not it, but I can point the way, and I can show them the way, and I can model
Mm-hmm.
something that, and usually people that are one, they're usually because they're looking at you going, how are you able to do that? How are you able to be peaceful when everyone else is falling apart?
Mm-hmm.
How are you able to be happy through all this? And I want what you have. Tell me about this God you deal with. Tell me about this person, this peace you have. How do you get that? I want that.
Yeah, I noticed that you said talked about those crossroads. I mean, Rhonda and I have had many of those. I mean, we've come out and got away from each other. It's like our relationship has been like a figure eight, constantly going of intersections. But I've noticed, through the years, because we both have wanted better, truly wanted better, and that's why I say, love has been powerful in our relationship, because as many times we didn't like each other, but the love intersections that we had is actually what keeps drawing us back. And through the years, if you keep working at that, those figure eights get smaller. The snowman is not as big anymore. You don't crawl, you don't do as much anymore. Well, Tiffany, I just want to say thank you so much for being with us, and all of the people that are watching. We thank you for being with us, and I just want to say, Tiffany Starnes, thank you again. You have helped us in so many ways, and so many people are going to be helped. And if this was helpful to you tonight, why don't you just share it on your social media? And if there's anything that we can do to help you in any way, you got all our contact information. Message us, and we'll be glad to do all that we can to help you in this time of trouble. Because at SEC, we say this: when we give, people live. And that's what we're here doing, is trying our very best to help you stay connected, and to help you even with the mental strain that's going on right now, because we understand it is there as well. And so we want to pray with you, and then we're going to say goodbye for the evening. So Tiffany, would you like to say a prayer tonight as we leave?
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you so much for who you are and what you are, Lord. I thank you so much that you're still in control, Lord. And you have already overcome this world, Lord, and you treat all of our sicknesses and all of our disease, Lord. When we thank you that you are working this out for us, Lord. We thank you that you've brought us to a place where we sit and we need to hear from you and we need to know what you're talking. And Lord, just help us seek what it is you're trying to tell us in this place, because we know you will come and you will calm these storms. And we thank you in advance that that's going to happen and you're going to take care of that. Lord, I lift up every single person now that is struggling, Lord, and that are stressed and overwhelmed, angry and anxious, disconnected, and feeling frustrated within their home right now. Lord, I just ask you to give them a peaceful position with their pain and with their frustration, Lord. I especially pray for those people that are essential and are on the front line right now, Lord, that you continue to surround them with your angels and keep them safe as they daily take risk in the situation, Lord. And those people that are sick right now, Lord, that I ask you to just lay a healing hand on them right now, Lord, and just help them to be restored. And those that are grieving right now because they have lost loved ones right now and they're feeling very isolated and unable to honor their loved ones in the way that they want to and the way that they're used to and accustomed to right now, Lord, to just help them reassure their heart that it is an absence of routine, not an absence of knowing that they're loved and the love is present and the love is with them in their awareness, Lord. So I ask you with each person and where they are right now, Lord, that you give them a special touch right now and bring a Prince of Peace to their left and their Comforter to their right, Lord, and just help them to hold their head up high to know that you have not forgotten about them and that you are love them and that you cherish them and you see their struggles, Lord, and that you say that you will never leave us and you will never abandon us, and that you are never closest but to the brokenhearted. So we rest in those promises and those assurances right now. And that you say that you did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. And we rest in that right now, Lord. We ask for that love. We ask for that power. We ask for uh, that set mind and that calm mind right now. And we thank you in advance for what you're doing and what you're going to do as you walk through with us day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. And I thank you for my church and what they are and what they stand for, and that they are willing to do these things to reach out, and that this will penetrate the hearts and the minds and be able to bring us together and be with us, Lord, until the day we can embrace each other again, Lord. In Jesus' holy and righteous, all-powerful name, we love you and we trust you. Amen.
Amen. Well, amen, everybody. Well, we will see you tomorrow night at 6:30 again for our family prayer time. God bless you.